they're massive sanctions, and sanctions on oil. The two biggest oil companies, among the biggest in the world, but they're Russian. They do a lot of oil. And hopefully it'll push, hopefully he'll become reasonable, and hopefully Zelensky will be reasonable too.
Let's bring in our executive editor for the Middle East, North Africa, and Russia. That's Stuart Livingston-Wallace in Dubai for us. Stuart, what do you make of these comments? It seems like a bit of a U-turn from President Trump.
It does. I mean, I think it speaks to the frustration that you've been seeing is increasingly evident, I think. That Trump is coming to the realization, he has said so publicly, that, you know, as he says, they have these very nice conversations and they say very nice things to each other and then nothing happens. And I think there's a sense that he is finally running out of patience. But again, we'll see how long he can sustain this, because, you know, the track record here is that the rhetoric changes, you know, phone calls are made, overtures are made, and then the rhetoric changes again. So the question is, can he hold the course this time around to apply consistent pressure to Russia? And will Russia show any capitulation whatsoever in terms of its negotiating position with regard to Ukraine?
Stuart, we were just talking about where we're seeing Brent crude right now. I wonder if you take a look at these sanctions, if in fact they do stick, are there potential winners and losers in this scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something we've been looking at, you know, very carefully this morning. So sort of the initial take on this is that India in particular, and you've seen this very nice reporting that we've had out of Delhi very recently, saying that the refiners in India are likely to be running down their purchases of Russian oil. The question is, where do they then go to substitute in those grades? Because not all crude is the same. And traditionally, India had bought from the Middle East. That had declined in favor of Russia because it was getting this discount on the oil. In a scenario where they do indeed run down those purchases from Russia, one would assume that they'll return to the Middle East. And so that potentially means, you know, a great deal more demand for crudes coming out of places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And remember, this is at a time when both of these producers have a lot of spare capacity there. So India was buying something like 1.8 million barrels a day from Russia. The UAE and Saudi between them have spare capacity of something close to 3 million. Now that's quite simplistic in the sense that, you know, they are part of OPEC and they will need to negotiate this. But there is certainly the capacity there, and I suspect, given where the oil price is today, they would like to be producing more and shipping it off to India.
Does this get Putin and Russia to the table, Stuart, or does this potentially frustrate the situation even further and we see another tit for tat?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the short term, very hard to call. And Putin has certainly shown no inclination to come to the negotiating table and negotiate in good faith. However, in the medium term, if these sanctions work, and that's a big if because Russia is very good about getting around sanctions, but let's assume in a scenario where they do stick and they are effective, that will pile a great deal of pressure on the Russian economy. And it's a war economy. It is geared up to be quite resilient, and it has been quite resilient over the last couple of years. But it will reach its limit, and there is only so far it can go. It's a very, very commodity-dependent economy, and if it can't sell the commodities, oil in particular, then it's at some point going to have to show some inclination to negotiate.